Episode 1, The Offering, Washington, as not a burial. The first thing Mara noticed when she returned to Haleth was that no one looked her in the eye. Not her childhood neighbor, not the priest who baptized her, not even her cousin Jonah, who used to hold her hand during storms. They all smiled. They all said, "Welcome home," but their eyes remained fixed on something behind her, as if she had brought something back with her. And Mabesh had. Her mother's obituary had arrived by post. No signature, no date, just a single sentence printed on yellow paper. She has been accepted. Mara took the next train. At the edge of the village, the trees seemed taller, the birds didn't sing, and the air tasted faintly of smoke. Not wood, not fire, ash. The funeral was not scheduled. No service, no grave. When Mara asked where her mother was buried, the priest blinked once, slow, deliberate, and said she was never meant for the ground. They showed her the field. It was empty. No stone, no cross, no flowers, just a black patch in the soil, as if something had been taken up, not placed down. Mara stood there for hours, waiting for grief, for memory, for God. None came, only the wind, and a voice in her head she hadn't heard since childhood. Not all sacrifices are burned. Child, some are kept warm. That night, Mara went to her mother's old house. It was exactly as she remembered, and completely wrong. The mirrors were covered, the walls hung. The Bible on the nightstand had no writing, only blank pages stained with wax. At midnight, the bell rang, but there was no bell tower. She followed the sound to the church. Still nameless, still standing. The doors opened before she touched them. Inside, candles lit themselves. The pews were empty, except for one. A woman sat her day alone, back turned, rocking slightly, whispering something, a name, over and over, but not Mara's mother's name. Mara's. She approached slowly. The woman turned. Her face was wrong, not disfigured, not demonic, just too perfect, like it had never belonged to her. She didn't die, the woman said. She was given. Mara stepped back. Who accepted her? She asked. The woman smiled. You'll meet him soon. He's always hungry this time of year. A candle behind Mara cracked, then another, and in the silence, she heard breathing from the altar. Not human, not animal, something older, something remembering itself. She ran, but the doors were already closed. The final line of the episode burns across her vision. Even after the screen fades to black, the offering was not a burial. It was an invitation. Episode 2, The Choir That Forgot Its Song. The choir began to hum at sunrise. No lyrics, no melody, just one endless, throbbing note, like a throat halfway between prayer and scream. It vibrated the windows, set the birds to silence, made the floorboards whisper beneath Mara's feet. She hadn't slept, not since the voice at the altar, not since the name she never told anyone was spoken back to her. Not Mara, the other one, the one she remembered only in fever, in childhood dreams, in the spaces between her mother's lullabies. At 6 a.m., the choir stopped, all at once, as if someone had pulled the sound out of the air, and Mara, standing in her mother's old kitchen, holding a mug of untouched tea, her day sound she would never forget, her own name, sung in reverse. From outside the window, she rushed to the church. Inside, the choir had assembled, 12 villagers, eyes closed, barefoot, mouths open, but no sound. Not anymore. The priest stood before them, arms raised. They have forgotten the song, he said, smiling, as was promised. Mara stepped forward. What are they singing? The priest tilted his head. Nothing. That's how you know it's working. Suddenly, one of the choir members collapsed. A boy, maybe 16. Blood trickled from his ears. They didn't stop. They didn't help. They kept humming, soundless, faceless, faithful. Mara knelt beside the boy. His eyes fluttered open. He gasped and said a name, her name, but not the one she knew. You were sung before birth. He whispered. Your voice was the first to be silenced. Then he died, smiling, like her mother. That night, Mara Saturday alone in the chapel. No choir, no priest, just echoes, and that strange, familiar humming, still hanging in the corners like cobwebs. She walked to the altar. There was something beneath it, a door, chained, smeared with wax. On the floor beside it, a book of hymns. She opened it. Every page was blank, except the last one line, scrawled in ink that pulsed. Only those who forget their name may sing the name that was erased. She closed the book. Her ears rang. She felt a sound moving through her bones. Not music, but command. From deep beneath the altar, something began to knock. 3 times. Low, rhythmic, like the beginning of a song no one dares remember, and Mara, for the first time, began to hum back. Episode 3. The priest who northeast for blinks. Mara tried not to stare, but she couldn't help it. He never blinked, not during the mass, not during the hymns, not even when the incense burned so thick it made the rest of the congregation cough. He stood at the altar with the stillness of a statue, a smile that never wavered, eyes like, all deep, dark, and endless, not kind, not cruel, just watching. At first, she thought it was her imagination, sleep deprivation, stress, dull whispers, but then she checked. She Saturday in the front pew and watched him 2 hours, not once, not a twitch, not a flicker, not a blink. That night, she asked an old woman in the village, "How long has he been here?" The woman smiled, like she'd rehearsed it. "Since before the church had a name." "What's his name?" A pause. 10. "We don't ask that here, child. He speaks for the one who lost his." Mara pressed further. "What was his name before he became a priest?" The woman's eyes grew glassy. Her voice softened. "We don't remember. That's how we keep him safe." Later, Mara searched the church archives. Old records, photos, birth certificates, but every document with the priest's face was blurred, smudged in the same place. The eyes, as if even paper refused to capture them. At midnight, she entered the church again. Alone, he was there, waiting, still smiling, still unblinking. She walked up the aisle slowly, deliberate, heart pounding. "What are you?" she asked. The priest tilted his head. "What all priests are, Mara." A voice borrowed from silence. She stepped closer. "You don't blink." He nodded once. "Because I was painted, not born." He removed his collar, unbuttoned his robe. Beneath, not flesh, canvas, stretched, cracked, threaded with words and ink too old to speak. His chest was a scroll, his heartbeat, the scratching of a quill. Mara stumbled back. "What do you want?" "That's my wind." "Nothing. I only exist to remember what he looked like before he was forgotten." The candles around them began to flicker, but the flame didn't move. It stood still, frowning, because time had paused. Then the priest reached into his chest, through the parchment, and pulled out a folded piece of paper, still wet with ink. He handed it to Mara. She opened it. Only one word, her name, but written backwards, and beneath it, "To see the truth, you must unsee yourself." She looked up. The priest was gone. In his place, a mirror, where the crucifix used to hang, and in the reflection, she wasn't blinking either. Episode 4. The Mass without a cross. Sunday came, but there were no bells, only silence, heavy, expectant, like the pause before lightning strikes, but never does. The villagers gathered, not in joy, not in grief. They entered the nameless church, like they were returning to a cage they had built themselves. Mara followed. The pews were full, the altar draped in black, the candles already lit, but there was no cross, no crucifix, no symbol of sacrifice, no memory of the man who once hung in pain for others. Instead, there was a mirror, tall, framed in bone, polished until the light bent around it, and at its base, a bowl, empty but wet. The priest entered, still unblinking, still smiling, still wrong. He raised his hands, but he did not speak. The choir began to hum, the same note as before, not song, summoning. The villagers rose in unison, and Mara noticed something. No one blinked. The priest approached the mirror. He knelt, placed his forehead to the glass, then whispered a single word, "Fade." The bowl filled instantly. Not wine, not oil, blood, fresh, warm, still moving. The villagers began to chant, words Mara couldn't understand, but her bones could. Her marrow shivered with recognition, because the language was older than sound. A woman stepped forward. She dipped her finger into the bowl, traced a symbol onto her tongue. She didn't flinch, didn't scream. She just smiled, then turned to the mirror and began to confess, not sins, but memories. "I remember my real name. I remember when he was still allowed to speak." One by one, they stepped forward, each offering blood, or memory, or names they were told to forget. Mara stood frowning in the back. She tried to leave, but her feet wouldn't move, because the mirror was humming now, calling her, showing her something only she could see, a version of herself, kneeling, eyes black, hands stained red, smiling. That priest looked at her. For the first time, he blinked. Once. "Lo, the Mass is not for remembrance, Mara," he said. "It's to keep him asleep, the one we erased, the one who fed on worship until worship turned hollow. You must take communion, or he will rise hungry." Mara took a step back. The church groaned. The mirror cracked. and the blood in the bowl began to boil. A child screamed, not in fear, in joy. "He's waking up," the child cried. "We forgot to slowly." Mara turned and ran. The church doors flung open as if exhaling her. Outside, the sky had turned the color of rust, and on the wind, a voice, low and ancient. "You do not attend Mass to remember me. You attend, so I forget you." Episode 5, The Gospel of Teeth. There was a door Mara had never seen. Small, low, hidden behind the organ, beneath a tapestry that bled dust when touched. No lock, no knob, only a single symbol carved into the wood. A mouth, open, too wide, with no tongue, only teeth. The priest told her, "That door is not for the living," but he said it like a dare. So she waited, until night, until the candles burned low, until the choir stopped humming, and then she opened it. The staircase spiraled downward, not made of stone, but of jawbones, human, small, filed smooth by time. Every step creaked, not from weight, but from memory, as if the bones remembered being part of someone who was never allowed to scream. At the bottom, a single chamber, round, lit by lanterns that had no flames, and in the center, a table, wooden, rotting, covered in teeth. Thousands, each one cleaned, numbered, and engraved with words, not names, not scripture, commands. Mara picked one up. It was a molar, still stained with blood. She squinted to read the etching. Swallow silence. She picked up another. Forget the name you were born with. And another. Worship with your jaw clenched. At the far end of the room, a cabinet. Inside, rows and rows of glass jars. Inside the jars, gums, preserved, floating, still twitching. A small plaque above the cabinet read, "These belong to the unborn believers. Their faith was carved before breath." Mara backed away. She stumbled. Her hand landed on a tray of teeth. They scattered, and as they hit the floor, the room began to whisper. Not in her ears, in her mouth. Words formed on her tongue, without permission, without prayer. "My body is the page. My teeth are the gospel." She couldn't stop. Each commandment begins with a bite. She tried to scream, but her jaw locked, tight, sealed. The teeth were reading her. In the mirror across the room, she saw her reflection, smiling, but it wasn't her smile. It was wider, unnatural, and inside her mouth, rows of teeth that didn't belong to her. Some were child-sized, some sharpened, and one was missing. She turned. On the table, in the center, one empty space, a tooth-shaped slot, waiting. Above it, the words, "The final believer speaks through her." The manuscript in her bag pulsed. Ah, a page turned, written in jagged ink. She has opened the mouth. Let the chewing begin. As Mara fled the chamber, the whispers followed, and behind her, the teeth began to hum. Episode 6, The Rain That Carries Names. It only rains once a year in Halef. They call it the falling. No one says why. No one steps outside. Doors are locked, curtains drawn, mirrors covered. Even the church is silent. And for Halef, that's rare. Mara didn't remember this tradition, or Mabesh was made to forget it. But the night before the rain, an old man left a note on her doorstep, wrapped in cloth, tied with red string. Inside, one sentence: "Do not cover your skin." She didn't sleep. She waited, and at exactly 3:03 am, the sky broke, not with thunder, but with whispers. The rain fell without sound, and every drop that touched the ground glowed. She stepped outside, alone. Rain clung to her arms, her neck, her face. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It was aware. Then, it started. Letters began to form on her skin, running like ink across her arms. Not random, not language. Names, one on her left shoulder, Elia, one down her forearm, Seraphil, across her collarbone, one she couldn't pronounce, but her bones recognized it. She stumbled to the mirror, and for a moment, she didn't see her reflection. She saw every version of herself that had carried those names. In other lives, other centuries, other beliefs, all staring back, some weeping, some laughing, one burning. She tried to wipe the names away. They didn't smear. They sank into her, like memory returning home. The manuscript opened on its own. The rain soaked the pages, but the ink didn't run. It expanded. New lines revealed. The sky remembers you, and it wants you back. Then the villagers came, wrapped in cloaks, faces hidden. They carried bowls, not to collect water, to catch the names that didn't belong to them. Mara watched as they knelt, let the rain fall on their faces, and scraped the names off each other, with fingernails sharpened from bone. One woman whispered, "If it writes his name on you, you must cut it out before it roots." Mara ran. The rain followed, not falling anymore. Chase aim, each drop chanting the same name. Mara, Mara, not your name, not your name. She collapsed under the old tree behind the chapel, soaked, markings everywhere, and in the center of her chest, one name, glowing, shifting, alive, Eshara. She didn't know it, but it knew her. The manuscript pulsed. A final line appeared. When the sky names you, you must choose, wear it, or bury it. She looked up. The rain had stopped, and above her, clouds were forming. Something. A face. Not angry, not divine, just curious. Episode 7. She who Washington S. baptized in smoke. Baptism was never meant to be gentle. It was meant to mark, to scar, to bind. But the people of Halath didn't baptize with water. They baptized with smoke. Mara awoke in a room she didn't remember entering. Stone walls, no windows, only a hole in the ceiling, and through it, a slow curl of smoke, descending, not rising, descending. She tried to move, but her wrists were tied, not with rope, with hair, braided, still warm. It smelled of incense and grief. Around her stood 7 figures, robed, masked, each mask painted with a different symbol. A weeping eye, a burning tree, a hand with no fingers, a broken circle, a cracked sun, a mirror, and a name crossed out. The priest entered last. He carried no book, only a bowl, filled with ash, and held before her, smiling. You were born once, he said. Now you must be forgotten properly. Mara tried to speak. He placed a finger over her lips. We do not baptize to welcome. We baptize to erase. The smoke reached her face. It didn't sting. It didn't choke. It opened something. Behind her eyes, beneath her ribs, in the space where her first scream once lived. And it whispered, this is not a new name. This is the old one. What's her name? The priest dipped his fingers in the ash, pressed them to her forehead, drew a symbol she couldn't see, but could feel. It burned through the skin and down into memory. Each of the 7 figures stepped forward. One by one, they whispered a piece of a name. Not her current name, not the false one given in birth records. The true one, the one she had forgotten. On purpose, as the final word was spoken, the smoke turned white. Not pure, but final. And then, the ropes fell. Her hands were free, but she couldn't move. Not out of fear, out of completion. She had been rewritten. The priest placed the bowl of ash at her feet. Inside it, she now saw teeth. Baby teeth, cracked, still holding syllables in their enamel. He leaned in. You have been baptized, Mara, but not into faith, into function. You are now a gate, and something ancient has been trying to come through you. Since before you bled, she was handed a veil, not white, gray, smelling of smoke and scripture. Wear this, he said, so the old ones know where to enter. Mara put it on, and when she did, she heard the past pray to her. The manuscript was waiting in her room, open, smoking. One new line had written itself in soot. Those baptized in water serve the church. Those baptized in smoke become it. Episode 8. The day the sky looked down. It started with a shadow, but there were no clouds, no wind, no birds, just stillness, and the overwhelming sense that something above had opened its eyes. At first, no one spoke. Even the priest was silent. Even the bells, those cursed bells, refused to ring, because it wasn't a storm coming. It was attention, and attention from above is never a blessing. The sky changed color. Not gray, not black, blue, too blue, the kind of blue that felt painted, wrong, as if the atmosphere had been peeled back to expose something watching behind it. Mara looked up. She shouldn't have. She knew the rules. Never looked alone at the altar, never say your name in the mirror, and never ever look back at the sky. But she did, and it blinked. Not literal, not with lashes or lids, but she felt it. A slow closing, a slower opening, like a lid made of light and silence. And in that moment, Mara remembered a dream she never had, of standing at the edge of creation, with no skin, no voice, and a question burning inside her like flame. Do you see us? Now she knew the answer. Yes. Rain didn't fall. It hovered, flouncing droplets, suspended midair, not moving, just vibrating, just waiting. For what? For permission. The villagers began to kneel, not from faith, from reflex, like children caught in a lie. The priest spoke, but his voice cracked for the first time. Don't speak. It's listening. Mara didn't kneel, couldn't. Something in her chest refused to bend. Instead, she stood taller, took off the veil, and whispered into the air. What did we forget? The wind returned, one gust, one breath, straight from the sky, and it answered with a sound that wasn't thunder. It was older, lower, like scripture being chewed. Then it spoke, not in words, in names. thousands, one after another, names never recorded, never given, never allowed, forgotten names, each one echoed through the village, each one carved into the walls, the trees, the people. And when Mara heard hers, not Mara, but the name hidden in bone, she fell to her knees, not in surrender, in recognition. The manuscript flipped open, pages tearing themselves backward, until the first page returned, and for the first time, it wasn't blank. There was one phrase burned in light. When the sky remembers, the earth must confess. That night, the stars didn't come out, because the sky wasn't finished looking. Episode 9. The voice behind the altar. No one remembered when the altar was built, only that it had always been there. Heavy, cracked, older than the church, older than Haleth, and, maybe, older than God. They prayed to it, bled near it, whispered into it, but it had never spoken back. Until now, it began with a breath, not human, not wind, a breath that came from beneath the stone, a slow, warm exhale that fought there and made every candle tremble, as if they, too, feared what was about to begin. Mara stood alone in the chapel. The others had left when the sky refused to sleep, but something called her back. Not guilt, not faith, a pull, like gravity, but older, hungrier. She touched the altar, cold, then warm, then pulsing. She leaned closer, and then she heard it, a voice, hoarse, cracked, impossible, coming from behind the altar. You bury my mouth in stone, and still you hoped I would sing? Mara staggered back. The voice wasn't loud, but it filled the space, like smoke fills lungs. Low, inescapable. Holy, who are you? She asked. The reply came instantly. I was the first sound. You silence. She looked around. There was no one there, only her, and the altar, and the thing behind it, that had waited too long to be heard. The voice continued. They built me into the bones of your belief. They called me the echo, the mistake, the leftover word, but I remember my name. Suddenly, the altar began to bleed, a dark, thick liquid seeping from its base, not red, black, and it didn't drip. It rolled across the floor, across the walls, in a language Mara couldn't read, but understood anyway. One word repeated itself again and again. Return, return, return. Then the voice shifted, soft, feminine, familiar. Mara, you've worn so many names, but none of them were the one I gave you. You were not meant to worship. You were meant to wake me. The manuscript at her side lit with flame, but didn't burn. It opened. Pages fluttered, until a single phrase wrote itself in blood and breath. She who kneels to the altar will forget. She who listens behind it will inherit. Mara stepped forward, pressed her ear to the stone. The surface pulsed, and, ton, a new sound, a heartbeat, no, a second heartbeat. Inside her, the voice whispered one final thing. The altar was never a stage. It was a seal, and now it's cracking. Episode 10, the book that Washington S. Northeast were written. There was a space on the altar, a perfect rectangle, flat, unmarked, like something had once rested there and been removed, or worse, had never existed at all. Mara had seen it every day since she returned, but tonight, it called to her, not with sound, with emptiness, the kind of silence that begged to be filled. That night, she dreamed of a library, infinite, dustless, no books on the shelves, only pages, torn, soaked, stacked in silence, and at the center of the room, a table, unaware, a single object, bound in skin, stitched with hair, breathing. She approached. The book opened by itself. There was no title, no chapters, no authorship, just a question burned into the first page. If God forgot to write you down, will you write yourself loud enough to be remembered? Mara woke gasping. The dream had followed her, because on her floor, in ash and blood, was the book, real, breathing. She picked it up. The cover was warm. It smelled like prayer and fire. She opened to the first blank page. A cool Saturday beside it, not there before. Its tip stained red, not ink, memory. She didn't know what compelled her, but her hand moved, and she began to write. Not fiction, not confession, history, the kind that wasn't recorded, because no one dared to speak it out loud. I was born before belief, before baptism, before the first amen. With each sentence, the candlelight dimmed, not from exhaustion, but reverence. Even the flames were listening. As her blood inked the page, she saw things, visions. A man crucified upside down, not in punishment, but in offering. A woman made of mirrors, weeping names that no one had earned. A child born with no mouth, because its prayers would be too dangerous. 10. A page turned itself, blank, waiting. but not patient, and a voice rose from the book. "You are not writing the gospel. You are correcting it." Mara dropped the quill. Her fingers stained red. The words she'd written began to move, to crawl, to rearrange themselves, forming a shape, a face, hers, but older, holier, and completely unfamiliar. The manuscript on her table caught fire, not in destruction, in recognition, and across its final page, the words, "She has begun the unwriting. The book will now remember what the church made us forget." Behind her, the wind howled, but there were no windows open. Only the book, only the truth. And the truth was no longer asking to be believed. It was asking to be finished. Episode 11, The Saint Who Northeast First Slept. They called him a saint, but no church canonized him. No statue bears his name. No prayer ends with his face. He didn't perform miracles. He prevented them. His name was Ilarion, though few dared say it aloud, because when you spoke his name in the dark, he answered, "Awake, always awake." Mara first heard of him from the margins of the unwritten book. Not in ink, in scratches, claw-like marks between the lines. Trembling, desperate, one phrase, carved over and over. I watched him close his eyes. She found him in the tower no one entered. The one with no stairs, just rope and ash. It took her hours to climb. At the top, a single room, empty, except for a man sitting in the corner, knees pulled to his chest, eyes wide open, wet, dry, ancient. He looked at her without blinking. "I dreamed once," he said, and the world cracked. Mara approached slowly. "Are you alive?" He smiled, "Alive enough to warn you." The walls around him were covered in eyelids, pinned open, still twitching, still wet, each one marked with a date and a scream. "They tried to make me sleep," he said, "but I saw what sleep was hiding." He pointed to the sky outside the window. The stars were gone, not clouded, not dimmed, gone. He blinked once. Ilarion whispered, and 12 cities vanished. He closed both eyes, and we forgot Eden. Mara's breath caught. "You're saying God is dreaming now?" He finished, and we're what he dreams about when he wants to forget. Suddenly, the room grew cold. The rope she climbed burned from the top, gone in seconds. She was trapped. Ilarion stood, his legs cracked like paper. He walked to her, placing a finger on her forehead. Her vision blurred. She saw herself, not in the tower, but in a crib, screaming, alone, and something above her, watching, not smiling, just blinking, low, deliberate, terrifying. "He saw you, Mara," and he looked away. "You are what escaped his notice. You are what survived his forgetting." The book in her satchel pulsed again. Pages flipped violently. A new phrase appeared. "When the sleepless saint closes his eyes, the gate will open." Mara turned to Ilarion. "What gate?" He smiled, gently. "The one beneath your ribs. The one that bleeds when you lie to yourself. The one you'll open when he finally stops dreaming." A single tear fell from his eye. Not water, not sorrow. Light, blinding, silent, pure, and done. For the first time in 300 years, he blinked. The tower screamed. Not the wind, the walls. And below, something woke. Episode 12, The Name That Can't Be Forgiven. There are names you speak to summon, names you chant to worship, and names you whisper when you're alone, just to feel like someone's listening. But there is one name you do not speak, because once it's spoken, you remember, and remembrance is more dangerous than belief. Mara found the name by accident, though by now she didn't believe in accidents. It was carved into the spine of the unwritten book, so faint it only appeared under flame. 5 letters, not in Latin, not in Hebrew, not in any earthly tongue, but her tongue ached when she read them, and her blood warmed, not from fear, from recognition. She tried to pronounce it. The room pulsed, the walls inhaled, and the candles flickered, not from wind, but from warning. She didn't finish the word, couldn't. Something inside her mouth seized, as if her own voice was trying to protect her from herself. The priest found her that night. He didn't knock, he simply appeared, eyes darker than usual, hands trembling. "Where did you see it?" he asked. She didn't answer. "Don't lie," he said. "We all dream of the name, but only one of us remembers it." She handed him the book. He recoiled, as if the spine had burned him, but no flames touched his skin. "Do you know what they called that name?" he whispered. "The wound that remembers. It's not evil," he added. "It's honest, and that's what makes it unforgivable." He told her a story. A child once spoke the name. In sleep, he woke up smiling, eyes glowing. 3 days later, the entire village forgot what sky looked like, and the child, he simply vanished, left behind a single note, one sentence, burned into the bedpost. "It's not that I was chosen, is that I never forgot. The priest begged her to bury the book deep, beyond church walls, beyond reach, but the book was already changing, already rewriting, already remembering her. That night, Mara dreamed of a throne, not gold, not light, a throne made of tones, still twitching, still trying to speak, and seated upon it, a figure wrapped in smoke. Its face was hers, but older, broken, smiling. The figure whispered the name, not in sound, in feeling, and the world around her cracked, not collapsed, cracked, like an egg about to hatch. Mara woke with the name etched on her palms. The letters pulsed, softly, like a second heartbeat. Just beneath the skin, the manuscript was waiting for her. A new line had burned itself into the final page. Do not ask for forgiveness. Ask to remember. Because he didn't fall for sin, he fell for saying the name too loud. Episode 13, The Blood That Wrote the Sky. The sky changed color again, but this time, it wasn't symbolic. It wasn't metaphor. It wasn't a sign. It was ink, and it began to write. At first, only Mara saw it. Letters forming in the clouds. Long, sweeping lines across the heavens. Not lightning, not smoke. Sentences, alive, dripping, bleeding into the air. The first line appeared at dusk. They tried to silence me below, so I wrote myself above. The villagers didn't look up, couldn't. Their eyes refused. Some screamed when Mara tried to make them look. Others wept, not from fear, from memory, because somewhere in their bones, they remembered these words. The priest collapsed in the chapel, foaming at the mouth, clutching his chest. He whispered the same word over and over, rewritten, 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 then bled from the ice. Mara stood in the churchyard, alone, hands lifted, palms open, marks glowing. The blood from her name now floated, line by line, into the sky. She wasn't praying, she was responding, because the sky was no longer watching. It was speaking, and she was listening. She opened the manuscript, every page blank, not erased, absorbed. Its knowledge now belonged to the air, to the stars, to something older than either. And then the second line appeared. The church tried to bury me in bone, but I taught the marrow to remember. Mara's hands began to bleed. Low, steady, ritualistic. It didn't hurt, because pain had already turned into purpose. She let it fall, her blood, onto the chapel stones. Thirst drank it, quick, grateful, and the clouds above rose faster. Villagers dropped to their knees, not in devotion, in collapse, because the truth was too heavy, too wide. It no longer fit inside belief. And then came the third line, huge, blinding, stretching across the entire horizon. If you do not write me, I will write myself through you. Mara felt her spine arch, her breath catch, her name vanish from her lips. Because, no, she wasn't Mara. She was a pen, and the story was no longer in her hands. It was in her blood. The final line that night was not in words. It was in shapes, symbols, familiar yet ancient, written in the stars themselves. And every one of them spelled the same thing, a command, speak. The sky had written its truth. Now it waited to be answered. Episode 14, The Final Prayer. Washington's Northeast Forspoken. The bells rang for the first time in years. Not at dawn, not for mass, not for morning. They rang because something ancient had just stood up, and the sky stopped writing. No birds, no wind, no breath, as if the entire world had inhaled and refused to let go. Mara stood at the edge of the chapel's shadow, face lifted, hands trembling. She had bled, she had burned, she had remembered, but she had not yet spoken. The priest was gone, or perhaps he had never been real, just a mouthpiece, painted on history, a veil for something else. Now, there were no veils left, only voices, waiting to be claimed. The villagers gathered, but no one prayed. They stood in silence, not out of fear, not out of reverence, out of knowing, because deep down, every soul understands this truth. The final prayer is not for the divine. It is for ourselves, and most of us are too afraid to say it out loud. A child stepped forward, eyes closed, mouth sewn shut, and, yet, it sang, not with sound, with presence. Each breath a syllable, each heartbeat a verse, and the world listened. Mara felt the words rise in her throat, but they weren't hers. They were older, wiser, hers before she was named. She opened her mouth, and nothing came out, not because she had nothing to say, but because the prayer had already been spoken. In blood, in silence, in memory. That's when she understood. The final prayer was not a plea, not a question, not a bargain. It was a realization. There is no one left to save us, because we were never meant to be saved. We were meant to remember who we were before salvation was invented. The sky folded, the chapel cracked, the bells fell, one by one, and the air grew heavy, not with judgment, but with completion. The manuscript turned to ash, gracefully, as if relieved, as if it had been waiting to stop holding the truth together. And then the words appeared, not written, not whispered, just known. The final prayer was never spoken, because it was never meant to be said. It was meant to be remembered. Mara collapsed to her knees, and in that moment, the earth sighed, the heavens stilled, and silence became sacred again. Episode 15, the name written on her boat Northeast S. She stopped dreaming, because dreams are for those who forget. And Mara remembered everything, not just the church, not just the manuscript, not even the voice behind the altar. She remembered what came before the altar, before scripture, before language, before God had a name. It was not light, it was not void, it was her. They had hidden her name for centuries, carved it into tombs, buried it beneath doctrine, smeared it across rewritten gospels, until it bled into myth. But you cannot kill a name that was never spoken, only lived. Her skin began to peel, not from pain, from truth. Beneath it, her body was writing, every bone etched, every joint inked, letters, marks, symbols older than breath. She was not being rewritten, she was being revealed. The villagers gathered one last time, not to worship, not to pray, to witness, because the moment had come, not of salvation, not of judgment, of remembrance. Mara stepped into the center of the chapel, barefoot, eyes open, and the altar collapsed, not shattered, just unnecessary now. The seal was broken, because she had become the altar. The sky folded into silence, the stars dimmed, the church walls melted into memory, and Mara, no longer Mara, spoke her name, not with sound, but with being. The world flinched, not in fear, in recognition, and the name carved into her bones. Lit up, one word, but 1,000 meanings, a language that had no beginning, no end. It didn't translate, it unlocked. The final words of the manuscript burned across the horizon, not in ink, not in fire, but in the marrow of all things. She was never chosen, she was never cursed, she was simply the first to remember herself. The church of the forgotten name crumbled, not as punishment, but as release. Its work was done, and Mara walked forward, not into light, not into shadow, but into a silence that finally knew her name.